Yeah, thank you very much. And also a very warm welcome from my side. Yeah, it's a bit of a one-man show today, so I will do this alone. And but as we clearly want to focus on the new therapies which have been presented this year, I think that is feasible. And let me just share my screen. Okay. Yeah, I will talk about new therapeutic strategies for desmoid tumors today, and that, as you can imagine, is of course the presentation of the new data from the gamma secretase inhibitors. I will try to put that into perspective, and what I will actually do is show you the data from or what has been presented this year at ESMO and just 2 weeks ago or 1 week ago at the CTOS meeting. Which is more or less the same data. And yeah, when talking about desmoid tumors, as you all know, you have seen these slides before, I'm sure that we are talking about a rare disease, and it's a monoclonal fibroblastic proliferation, which is characterized by a very variable presentation, unpredictable clinical course. And the problem is that we do not have any approved health authority approved therapies available at the moment. All the things we use are more or less off-label use. So the incidence is around 6 cases per 1 million. And you all know that we started this consensus initiative, which already now dates back to 2014. I still remember that very well when we met there in a small meeting room in Frankfurt at the Frankfurt airport, bringing together people from the ERTC soft tissue and bone sarcoma group and from SPAGN. By that time, it was still named SPAGN with an E, and so I left it like that. And yeah, so the idea was to harmonize the treatment strategies for this disease, and we came up with this first position paper in 2015, which was updated 2 years later. And then, of course, we developed this whole process in certain ways. So first of all, we went global. The desmoid tumor working group went global. We included other experts, but also patients and patient advocates, not from all over the world, but from, I would say, a good representation from a lot of countries, from North America, Canada, from Japan, and of course from Europe, which was the initial core group of this initiative. This was the first advantage. The second advantage was that we started this exercise with a literature search, which was done by an external institute in Germany, which is actually the same institute we also worked together for our S3 guideline for soft tissue sarcomas in Germany. So these were the topics we covered, as you all know: pathology, molecular genetics, indication for treatment, available medical therapies, pain, quality of life, and also we had one representative from the EMA. So we also talked a bit about study endpoints, regulatory requirements, and study designs. This is the treatment algorithm you probably all know. We will certainly update that this year or next year, and but still, of course, the most important thing here is the frontline approach with the active surveillance in the majority of patients. Yeah, so this was published in 2020, beginning of 2020, in the European Journal of Cancer. So I will definitely focus now on the medical, on the systemic treatment options. And here we have these, I would say, 4 different options: anti-hormonal therapies, which we actually do not recommend anymore from the group. We have the chemotherapies, which are more or less the chemotherapies we also use in for soft tissue sarcoma patients: anthracycline-based regimens, pegylated liposomal doxorubicin, or these methotrexate vinblastine or vinorelbine combination. We then tried the tyrosine kinase inhibitors, and then, of course, most recently, the gamma secretase inhibitors, which I will focus today or which I will give the focus of that presentation today. But let's get started a bit with a not to forget these, the tyrosine kinase inhibitor that started with imatinib. We have, I think, overall 4 prospectively conducted trials. The first one from the USA, the second one from the French sarcoma group, and there was another one from our German interdisciplinary sarcoma group, more or less all demonstrating, let's say, a progression arrest in RECIST progressive desmoid tumors. The overall response rate was rather low, around 10% in most of the trials. But the good thing about that, of course, imatinib is quite well tolerated. That leads us to the second tyrosine kinase inhibitor, which has been tested. That was sorafenib. Here, this phase 3 trial, very prominently published in the New England Journal of Medicine a couple of years ago, comparing sorafenib versus placebo. So the results of this trial was an overall response rate of 33% for sorafenib and compared to 20% in the placebo arm, which was quite high and surprised all of us a bit. But that definitely has to do with the inclusion criteria of this trial, which we maybe can come back at a later stage of this presentation or in the discussion later on. Pazopanib, then, the third tyrosine kinase inhibitor, was tested in this French trial, the Desmoid study, a phase 2 study comparing pazopanib versus a chemotherapy combination, methotrexate plus vinblastine. The primary endpoint here was the progression arrest rate at 6 months, which was 84% in the pazopanib arm compared to 45% in the chemotherapy arm. So again, a trial favoring the tyrosine kinase inhibitors. But again, I would like to stress this here. All these therapies, either pazopanib nor sorafenib nor imatinib, are reimbursed or approved in any country in Europe or worldwide for this indication. So it's always off-label. So what we put down in our consensus last time regarding the available medical therapies is that due to the lack of comparative studies, we are still not able to propose a definitive sequence of the existing systemic treatment options. We have randomized data, which I showed for sorafenib, for pazopanib, and for methotrexate plus vinblastine. The most robust study, of course, is the one for sorafenib by that time. And the recommendation was to start the therapy with less toxic therapies initially, and then increase that, let's say, in a kind of stepwise fashion. Okay, this leads us now to the gamma secretase inhibitors, and here we have a completely new class of treatment options that have been tested in the last 2-3 or in a bit more than 2-3 years in desmoid tumors. And the first one is Nirogacestat, which is the one which is in the most recent development and is where we have a phase 3 trial, which has been presented in the presidential session at this year's ESMO meeting in September in Paris. So there is a mechanistic role for the use of gamma secretase inhibitors in this disease because they highly express Notch, and Notch can be blocked by gamma secretase inhibitors. So Nirogacestat is an oral investigational selective and small molecule gamma secretase inhibitor that already showed activity in a very small phase 1 and also in a small phase 2 trial. The phase 2 trial was performed only with 17 patients, but there were 5 partial responses and 12 stable diseases. So this was actually the basis for setting up this phase 3 trial, which is called DeFi, which is a global randomized double-blind placebo-controlled phase 3 trial comparing Nirogacestat versus placebo in adult patients with progressing desmoid tumors. 142 patients were randomized in this trial across 37 sites in North America and Europe. It was a 1-to-1 randomization, Nirogacestat versus placebo, primary endpoint, progression-free survival. And secondary endpoints, objective response rate, and also, which is maybe even more important, a couple of patient-reported outcome measures, including symptom burden, physical functioning, role functioning, and overall quality of life. So these are the two arms of the study, the Nirogacestat arm and the placebo arm. And if you look at the baseline demographics and characteristics, they are quite well balanced. We have, as you can imagine, a quite young patient population with a median age of 34 years, with a female predominance. We have 25% intra-abdominal and around 75% extra-abdominal tumor locations. And you can see the percentage of the treatment naive and the refractory or recurrent patients, which is also 1/4 for treatment naive and about 3/4 for refractory or recurrent patients. This is now the primary endpoint, and you do not often see such a Kaplan-Meier curve, I have to admit. It's a primary endpoint, PFS, which was met with a 71% reduction in the risk of disease progression compared to placebo. The median progression-free survival for placebo was 15.1 months and was not reached in the Nirogacestat arm due to the low number of events. And if you look at the pre-specified subgroups that have been defined before, you can see that this improvement or this benefit for in terms of PFS was more or less could be demonstrated over all the different subgroups about tumor location, mutation status, and also with a lower dose of Nirogacestat. The objective response rate, and that was evaluated throughout the study by blinded independent central review, was 41% with Nirogacestat compared to 8% in the placebo arm. Again, highly statistically significant. 7% complete responses for Nirogacestat, and the time to objective response was 5.6 months, which is quite low, so quite fast compared to 11.1 months for placebo. Here you can just see the substantial reductions in the tumor size in the Nirogacestat arm compared to the placebo arm. And that is the these are more or less a number of secondary endpoints, and I think they are maybe even more important than just the progression-free survival. These are the patient-reported outcome measures, and as you can see, there was a significant improvement in a couple of patient-reported outcomes. Here is pain, so Nirogacestat significantly reduced pain, which could be demonstrated by this brief pain inventory short form. Nirogacestat could reduce the desmoid tumor specific symptom severity, which was evaluated by a tool which has been specifically developed for desmoid tumor patient, which is called GODDESS, that was developed with the help of the Desmoid Tumor Research Foundation, which here the total symptom score is shown, and the second one is the physical functioning impact score, so which tells us something about the physical and role functioning and the overall quality of life. Again, a statistically significant improvement. And if you look at the, let's say, older or more classic ERTC QLQC30 patient-reported outcome tool, also for this tool, there was a significantly improved physical functioning, role functioning, and global quality of life compared to placebo. So that leads us to the safety profile of Nirogacestat, which was overall quite well tolerated. The most frequent adverse events were diarrhea, nausea, fatigue, hypophosphatemia, and rash. 95% of all these treatment adverse events or treatment emergent adverse events were grade 1 or 2. And the first onset of these events was very fast, so usually during the first days of treatment during the first cycle. 42% dose reductions, which are depicted here. Last but not least, we have this ovarian dysfunction, which is an adverse event which was seen in a number of patients, women of childbearing potential. This is a side effect which is not specific to gamma secretase inhibitors. We can actually see this in tyrosine kinase inhibitors and also in other oncology treatments quite often. But here, 75% of the women of childbearing potential showed symptoms of ovarian dysfunction. But on the other hand, there was also a resolution rate of 74% altogether in where the ovarian dysfunction resolved. So in summary, for the DeFi study, which is definitely, as of today, the largest and most robust and rigorous randomized controlled trial, which has ever performed in desmoid tumors. And by the way, which is also interesting, it is the first positive trial for a gamma secretase inhibitor in any indication. Gamma secretase inhibitors have been developed several years or decades before for completely different diseases, and they could never actually show any significant improvement or significant results. So this is actually the first positive trial. Nirogacestat demonstrated a rapid, sustained, and statistically significant improvements in all primary and secondary efficacy endpoints. I have shown that to you in detail. It showed a manageable safety profile, and it has definitely the potential to become, let's say, a kind of standard of care or first-line treatment for patients with desmoid tumors requiring systemic treatment. However, these are just the acknowledgements. And however, and this is important, this DeFi was not the only trial which has been presented this year. So there is actually another combined phase 2/3 trial ongoing with another gamma secretase inhibitor, which is called AL102 from Ayala. And this trial, or the first part, the phase 2 results of this trial, have been presented by Robin Jones at this year's ESMO as a mini oral presentation, and it was a poster presentation at the CTOS meeting a couple of days before. So it is a combined phase 2/3 trial, which means we have a phase 2 part. The phase 2 part is the part A, which is a dose finding part. There were 3 different doses of AL102, which were compared altogether in 42 patients. And this part A is then followed by the part B, which is actually the double-blind randomized part, which is very similar, in fact, to the DeFi trial we have just seen before. So 42 patients have been treated here overall. If you look at the baseline characteristics, they are quite similar. Again, young patient age, we have a female predominance, and it's quite similar in terms of intra-abdominal and other localizations. And you can see the different prior therapies. So 42 patients, as I said, were included, 14 in each of these different dose arms. Overall, the primary endpoint of this trial, of this part, was safety, and overall AL102 was generally well tolerated. The most adverse events were grade 1 and 2. There were no grade 4 or 5 adverse events, so very severe adverse events. And most of the events causing discontinuation included diarrhea, stomatitis, ALT elevation, and rash, which is very similar actually to the data we have seen with nirogacestat. If you look at the first efficacy results, there was one partial response observed at week 16, according to these very strict RECIST criteria, which means at least a 30% reduction in the tumor size. Which is another thing which is quite interesting, is that they already looked at the MRI T2 signal, which is a special signal which you can see in these MRI images, and here you can see a quite impressive reduction in the intensity in almost all of the patients. In 19 of 21 patients, there was this reduction in the T2 signal. So altogether, AL102 was generally well tolerated with a manageable safety profile in all the different dose arms. The part A, so the phase 2 part, which I just have which I presented, demonstrated efficacy across all arms. There was a first partial response in week 16, and there were 3 additional partial responses at a later stage, so over the follow-up period. And overall, these data from the part A, the phase 2, definitely support the initiation or the start of the part B of the phase 3, which is actually already done. So the part B, the phase 3, has already started and has recruited already a couple of patients. Most of the sites which are actually on board at the moment are sites which also took part in the phase 2 part of the trial. And the dose that has been selected was the 1.2 milligram daily dose. So this is actually the overview of the data. Both data sets have been presented at ESMO for the first time, and then at a kind of encore presentation at the CTOS meeting either as an oral presentation or as a poster presentation, but the core data was more or less the same in both presentations. So having said that, we have definitely a very new class of drugs on the table here for desmoid tumors, which seem very effective in terms of overall response rate and progression-free survival. And what I think is maybe even more important, they have a very effective, they are very effective in terms of patient-reported outcome measures, reduction of pain, improving symptoms, and reducing the symptom burden. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bernd. Those are really exciting data. I would now like to open up the discussion. If you have any questions, please make use of this opportunity and ask Bernd anything that comes to your mind. I just saw that Christina has joined us as well, but I don't know if you can actually talk, Christina.
Yes, I can. Hi together. Good evening.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, so I will directly jump in. Any questions so far?
No. I don't see
my
any
question is,
sorry, go ahead.
Okay, my question so far is because I have heard that or is there any update? If you think I saw that some pharma representatives are in the call as well, so are you planning to get an approval for the EMA region?
I mean, as far as I know, of course, the first approval will be aimed in the US for the FDA, and yeah, that's ongoing, or that's about to be submitted, and then we will. That I think the other steps depend on this, but that's nothing more I can tell at the moment.
Okay.
Is there anything else you would like to ask? I don't see.
But that's actually, I mean, the problem is actually I'm receiving on a daily basis questions about, yes, now we have the data, but we don't have the drug, and so what can we do? And that's actually, of course, we have a kind of phase at the moment where Nirogacestat is not yet available. We have, of course, the phase 3 trial ongoing with AL102, and there will be definitely a program, a compassionate use program for Nirogacestat, which should be available then in different countries.
Okay, because these are questions I receive too. So okay.
I see Kim raising her hand. Hi.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Bernd, for the presentation. So I guess for me and for most patients, what we are wondering is if we make the Nirogacestat a standard of care, what are we going to do about the ovarian dysfunction? What do we need to know to actually make a plan on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that is definitely something to discuss and definitely something to take into account. I mean, as far as from the data we have so far, it looks quite promising that in the majority of the cases there is a resolution of the ovarian dysfunction, but it's definitely something you have to discuss with your patient, especially taking into account that we have the majority of young female patients. And the good thing I would say about the trial is that we collected a lot of data about that. So we collected a lot of hormone level measurements all over the study, from the very early beginning to also in the follow-up. So we will I guess very soon have much more data on how this ovarian dysfunction actually looks like, how are the hormone levels, and we will, so we will definitely be able to say more about that and describe that in more detail in the upcoming month, I would say. And maybe this is even the one of the only trials that is capturing all that in such a good way. And this is the good thing about that. But yes, of course, definitely something to take into account, to discuss with your patients. But my experience so far, I like to tell the story of one patient, a young female patient who had been in the DeFi trial. She was on placebo for almost 2 years. And of course, we all knew that she was on placebo because she had no side effects and there was a slow progression of the desmoid. But she never reached, of course, the 20%. And so she was not per definition progressive. So she couldn't switch to Nirogacestat. And then after we could unblind the patient and put her on the drug, guess what she experienced? Ovarian dysfunction. And but she definitely stayed on the drug and with very good results. The desmoid tumor also already in the first MRI, there is a clear reduction of the size. So yeah, but yes, definitely something to discuss in very detail with your patients. Any other questions?
I don't see any in the chat. Anything else from you, Christina?
No, currently not.
Okay, then let's say we call it a day.
Let me just ask you. I mean, what do you think about the data? I mean, I always discuss this data, of course, more or less only with medical experts, and so it would just be good to hear your opinion. And the funny thing about this, we usually never talk about the high activity. We always talk about ovarian dysfunction and side effects, and so yeah, would be just interesting to have your ideas on that and to have your impression on that.
Kim
Who is willing to say something?
Kim is.
I'm happy to say something.
Sure.
How much I count for being a full patient, but you know what the funny thing is that I've heard from a lot of patients who took the drug. You know, in the medical field, we will say, you know, the adverse events, they were, you know, okay-ish. They are definitely manageable for this drug, so no worries on that side. But if you ask patients like the fatigue or the diarrhea, if they have an adverse event of grade 3, I think my Wi-Fi is like going out. No, it's not. It's still there.
It's fine. It's fine. We hear you.
It's actually very debilitating for a lot of patients. You know, those grade 2, 3, we will grade them and we'll think that, you know, it's fine, but people are just not even able to work if they are that tired or if they have diarrhea like that. So that is as far as like the negative side, I guess. But what I also find very positive on this trial is that we have so much data on the quality of life, and we focus so much more on that as well. You know, with all the graphs and actually seeing what happens in, you know, in all the time frames. And also, if you tell patients that that is the goal for the tumor, or at least most of it, it's very nice to also show that in studies as well, instead of just telling patients that we're treating the symptoms and quality of life.
Yeah. I mean,
I just hope my internet got this.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
I think so.
We could hear you very well. And I mean, that's exactly why I'm asking, because it's always like that the perception of the doctors is always a bit different than the perception of the patients. And but in my experience, actually, diarrhea is definitely the most frequent, and for some patients, not for all of them, but for some patients, definitely something which is a problem. And but in the majority of the patients, it was actually very well tolerated, to be honest. But yeah. Any other comments?
We have a comment in the chat from,
from
Sylvia.
Sylvia.
Can you see it?
Yeah, Sylvia is asking, since the drug seems to work relatively rapidly, when should the treatment start and when do you stop? Is an on-off regimen useful? Yeah, a lot of questions, which I can't answer. And so, yeah, I mean, one thing which, so first question is when to start. I mean, at the moment, of course, we very much advocate for active surveillance for maybe 1 or 2 years. But I'm quite sure that this is something which might change when we have a drug like Nirogacestat or another gamma secretase inhibitor on the market, especially in those patients who are symptomatic. So having said that, that means we will probably, of course, start treatment earlier than we usually do at the moment. Second question is when to stop. I don't know. I mean, we know from the phase 2 there are patients on the drug for several years now. But at least from our experience from other drugs with tyrosine kinase inhibitor, we usually treat patients for a certain period of time. And when there is let's say, a stabilization of the tumor, then we stop. But if this is also valid in gamma secretase inhibitors, we don't know. So that's something none of the trials can actually answer this question, nor the DeFi trial, nor the Ayala trial. So that's something we definitely need another study to answer that. And the on-off regimen is more or less the same question. So treatment duration is definitely an open question. Other questions?
I'll say it again. I don't see anything in the chat.
I would maybe just take the opportunity to announce our next consensus meeting of the Desmoid Tumor Working Group. So we already met in a very small, or not small, maybe half of the people we already met in Vancouver during CTOS. And our aim is to, I mean, we have a lot of new things on the table, not only the gamma secretase inhibitors, we have more data for local therapies such as cryoablation, ILP, HIFU, and so on. We have all the prospective studies on active surveillance have been published meanwhile since our last meeting. So it's definitely worth to have another meeting, and we plan that for June next year in Milan, to update our existing guidelines with all the new things that came up. Okay, I'm done.
Okay, last time. Any more questions?